I was standing in my driveway, staring at the letter from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, when I realized my monthly fees had tripled overnight, and according to the notice, my residential home had somehow become a commercial property. My name is Lucas Norton, and I had lived in my 3-bedroom ranch house in suburban Phoenix, Arizona for 5 years without any major problems. Sure, the HOA could be annoying about lawn heights and mailbox colors, but nothing prepared me for what I was holding in my hands that Tuesday morning in March. The letter, signed by someone named Patricia Hendricks, who identified herself as the HOA president, stated that after a comprehensive review of property designations within our community, my home at 847 Sagebrush Lane had been reclassified as a commercial property. Therefore, my monthly HOA fees would increase from $150 to $475 effective immediately. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. My house was identical to every other house on my street. Same floor plan, same beige stucco exterior, same desert landscaping with gravel and cacti. I worked from home as a software developer, but that was it. No storefront, no clients visiting, no business signage. Nothing that could remotely justify calling my property commercial. I called the HOA office immediately. A woman with a nasal voice answered after 6 rings. Willow Creek HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi, I'm Lucas Norton from Sagebrush Lane. I just got a letter saying my property has been rezoned as commercial. There has to be some mistake. Hold, please. She put me on hold before I could say anything else. Elevator music played for what felt like an eternity. When she came back, her tone was clipped. Mr. Norton, according to our records, your property designation change was approved by the board last month. The notice was sent according to our bylaws. But why was it changed? My house is residential. I live here. That's it. You'll need to speak with Mrs. Hendricks about the specifics. She's not available right now. When will she be available? She'll be at the board meeting next Tuesday at 7 p.m. You can address your concerns then. The line went dead. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but kept coming back to that letter. $475 a month was ridiculous. That was an extra $3,900 a year. For what? The same mediocre lawn maintenance and generic community pool I barely used? That evening, I walked over to my neighbor Greg's house. Greg had lived in Willow Creek for 12 years and knew the HOA politics better than anyone. You're not going to believe this, I said, showing him the letter. Greg's eyebrows shot up as he read. Commercial? That's insane. You don't even have customers coming here. Exactly. Do you know Patricia Hendricks? Oh, I know Patricia. Greg handed back the letter with a grimace. She took over as HOA president about 8 months ago. Real piece of work. She's been on a power trip ever since, finding violations everywhere, sending out fines left and right. But this is a new level. Has anyone else gotten one of these? Not that I've heard, but I'll ask around. Over the next few days, I did some digging. I pulled up the original HOA documents from when I bought the house. Everything clearly stated residential property, residential zoning, residential fees. I checked with Maricopa County's online property records. My parcel was listed as residential single-family home. Nothing had changed on the official county records. I also discovered something interesting. Patricia Hendricks had only moved into Willow Creek 2 years ago, but she had wasted no time inserting herself into the HOA board. According to some old community newsletters I found in my garage, she had campaigned hard for the presidency, promising to increase property values and maintain high standards. What she had actually done was turn the HOA into her personal fiefdom, micromanaging every aspect of community life. Tuesday evening arrived, and I headed to the community center for the board meeting. The room was set up with a long table at the front where 5 board members sat, with Patricia Hendricks in the center. She was exactly what I expected. A woman in her late 40s with an overly styled blonde bob, wearing a blazer that screamed middle management and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. About 20 homeowners sat in the audience. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood barbecues. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We have a full agenda tonight, so let's keep comments brief. They went through routine business, approving minutes, discussing landscaping contracts, debating whether the community pool should be resurfaced now or next year. Finally, they opened the floor for homeowner concerns. I stood up. Lucas Norton, 847 Sagebrush Lane. I received a notice that my property has been rezoned as commercial and my fees are being tripled. I need an explanation because nothing about my property is commercial. Patricia's smile was tight and condescending. Mr. Norton, the board conducted a thorough review of all properties and found that yours meets the criteria for commercial designation under our revised bylaws. What criteria? I live in my house. I don't run a business from it. According to Section 7.3 of the revised bylaws, any property from which the homeowner derives income through remote work or internet-based activities can be classified as commercial use. The room went silent. Several people shifted uncomfortably. "That's half the neighborhood," someone called out. "Lots of people work from home." Patricia's expression hardened. The board has discretion in applying these designations based on the nature and extent of the commercial activity. "I'm a software developer," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I sit at a computer in my spare bedroom. That's not commercial activity." The board has made its determination. You can file a formal appeal, which will be reviewed at next month's meeting. Until then, the fees stand. This is ridiculous. You can't just make up rules and apply them however you want. The board operates within the authority granted by the HOA covenants, Mr. Norton. If you have a problem with that, you're free to seek legal counsel. She turned away from me, dismissing me entirely. Next item on the agenda. I sat down, fuming. A woman a few seats over leaned toward me and whispered, "She did the same thing to the Martins on Copper Ridge. Different excuse, same result. They're paying commercial rates too." After the meeting, several homeowners approached me in the parking lot. Turned out I wasn't alone. Patricia had found creative ways to reclassify 6 other properties as commercial over the past 4 months. The Martins ran an Etsy shop. The Johnsons occasionally rented out their spare room on Airbnb. The Williamses had a small YouTube channel. None of it was substantial business activity, but Patricia had seized on any excuse to jack up their fees. "She's trying to fund some big renovation project for the community center," explained Tom Martin, a retired teacher with a gray beard. "She wants to add a gym, expand the pool, put in tennis courts. But most people voted against raising fees across the board, so she's finding other ways to squeeze money out of people." "That can't be legal," I said. "Probably not, but fighting an HOA is expensive. Most people just pay up or sell and leave." I went home that night determined not to be one of those people. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted a real estate attorney named Richard Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. "This is unusual," he said after I explained the situation. "HOAs have broad authority, but they can't arbitrarily reclassify properties to increase revenue. The designation has to match actual use and comply with county zoning. So what can I do? File a formal appeal with the HOA first. Document everything. If they deny it, we can pursue legal action. But I'll be honest with you, these cases can drag on for months or even years, and legal fees add up quickly." "How much are we talking?" "A case like this could run $5,000 to $10,000, possibly more if it goes to court." I thanked him and hung up feeling defeated. I couldn't afford that kind of money for a legal battle, and Patricia probably knew it. Then I had another idea. If the HOA was claiming my property was commercial, that meant they were asserting something that contradicted official county records. Maybe the county would have an issue with that. I called the Maricopa County Planning and Development Department and eventually got through to someone named David Kramer, a senior planner who handled zoning issues. "Let me pull up your property," he said. I heard typing. 847 Sagebrush Lane. Yeah, that's zoned R1, single-family residential. Has been since the subdivision was developed in 2008. Nothing's changed. That's what I thought. But my HOA is claiming it's commercial and tripling my fees. Your HOA doesn't have the authority to change zoning designations. Only the county can do that through a formal rezoning process. What your HOA calls the property internally is their business, but they can't override county zoning. Can they charge commercial rates for a residentially zoned property? There was a pause. That's more of a legal question, but it sounds problematic. If they're misrepresenting your property's status to justify higher fees, that could be fraud. Do you have documentation? I have the letter they sent me. Send it to me. Let me review this. If they're playing games with zoning designations, we need to know about it. I emailed him the letter immediately, along with photos of my property showing its clearly residential nature. David called me back 2 days later. Mr. Norton, I've reviewed your situation and discussed it with our legal team. What your HOA is doing raises serious concerns. They're claiming a zoning status that doesn't exist, which could mislead homeowners and potentially impact property values and taxes. We're going to open an investigation. An investigation into the HOA? Yes. If they're doing this to multiple properties, as you've indicated, this could be systematic fraud. We take that very seriously. Relief washed over me. Finally, someone with actual authority was taking this seriously. Over the next 2 weeks, I submitted my formal appeal to the HOA, documenting everything: the county's confirmation of my residential zoning, photos of my property, a detailed description of my work activities, and statements from neighbors confirming I ran no commercial operation. I sent copies to all 5 board members via certified mail. The HOA's response came quickly: denied. According to Patricia's letter, the board had reviewed my appeal and found no grounds to reverse the designation. The letter was 3 sentences long and offered no substantive explanation. Meanwhile, David Kramer's investigation was moving forward. He contacted me several times for additional information and told me he was reaching out to other affected homeowners. He also requested documentation from the HOA, which apparently they were slow to provide. Then things escalated in a way I didn't expect. On a Thursday afternoon in early April, I came home from grocery shopping to find Patricia Hendricks standing in my driveway with another woman I didn't recognize. They were taking photos of my house with a tablet. "What are you doing?" I asked, getting out of my car. Patricia didn't even look embarrassed. "Conducting a property inspection. As a commercial property, you're subject to quarterly inspections under the bylaws. You can't just come onto my property without permission. The HOA has the right to inspect properties to ensure compliance with community standards. Not without notice, and not without the homeowner present." The other woman, who wore a badge identifying her as Susan Morris, HOA compliance officer, spoke up. "We sent notice via email 3 days ago." "I never got any email." "That's not our problem," Patricia said coldly. "We've documented several violations. Your fence has peeling paint, your gravel landscaping has weeds, and you have a commercial satellite dish that wasn't approved." "That's a regular television dish. It's been there since before I moved in." "Nevertheless, violations have been noted. You'll receive fines in the mail." She turned and walked away, Susan following like a loyal henchman. I was shaking with anger. This was harassment, pure and simple. I called David Kramer immediately and told him what had happened. "That's useful, actually," he said. "It shows a pattern of targeting. Document everything. Take your own photos showing the condition of your property. Keep all emails and letters." "I want to fight back," I said. "What can I do?" "Right now, let the investigation proceed. We're building a case. In the meantime, I'd suggest you contact the other affected homeowners and see if they'll provide statements. The more evidence we have of systematic abuse, the stronger the case becomes." I spent that weekend reaching out to everyone I knew who had been hit with bogus commercial designations. Tom Martin was eager to help. So were the Johnsons, the Williamses, and 3 others. We met at Tom's house on Sunday afternoon. "She's been targeting people who can't fight back easily," Tom said. "Single homeowners, retirees on fixed incomes, young couples just starting out, people who can't afford lawyers." "But why?" asked Jennifer Johnson, a nurse in her 30s. "What does she get out of this?" "Money and power," Tom replied. "The commercial fees bring in an extra $1,200 per month from each property. That's over $80,000 a year from just the 7 properties she's reclassified. She controls that money as HOA president." "Has anyone looked at the HOA financials?" I asked. "We requested them last month," said David Williams, a stocky man who worked in construction. "Patricia claimed they weren't available yet because the accountant was behind. That was 6 weeks ago." "That's not right. Homeowners have a right to review HOA finances." Try telling Patricia that. An idea was forming in my mind. What if we do more than just cooperate with the county investigation? What if we push for a special election to remove Patricia from the board? Everyone looked at me. The bylaws allow for a recall election if 10% of homeowners petition for it, I continued. There are 230 homes in Willow Creek. We need 23 signatures. I can get 23 signatures by tomorrow, Tom said. Plenty of people are fed up with her. Then let's do it. We divided up the neighborhood and spent the next week knocking on doors, explaining what Patricia had been doing and collecting signatures. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Most people had their own horror stories about Patricia's reign. Ridiculous fines, aggressive enforcement of petty rules, rude treatment at meetings. By the following Sunday, we had 62 signatures, almost triple what we needed. I delivered the petition to the HOA office on Monday morning. Brenda, the office administrator, looked at it with wide eyes. I'll need to give this to Mrs. Hendricks. That's fine. According to the bylaws, she has 10 days to schedule a special election. Brenda nodded nervously. Patricia's response came by email that evening, sent to all homeowners. She claimed the petition was invalid due to procedural irregularities and refused to schedule an election. She also accused me by name of spreading lies and attempting to undermine the HOA for personal gain. That was a mistake. Her email prompted an avalanche of angry responses from homeowners. The community Facebook group exploded with people sharing their grievances. Several homeowners who hadn't signed the original petition reached out asking how they could help. I forwarded Patricia's email to David Kramer. He called me the next morning. "This is good," he said. "Well, not good for you, but good for the investigation. She's digging herself deeper. I have some news. We've completed our preliminary investigation, and we're referring this to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office." The county attorney? Why? Because what we've found goes beyond HOA mismanagement. Your HOA president has been systematically misrepresenting property classifications to inflate fees, which meets the legal definition of fraud. She's also been depositing the extra fees into accounts that appear to be under her personal control, not the HOA's general fund. My jaw dropped. She's stealing from the HOA? That's what it looks like. The county attorney will investigate further, but there's enough evidence to warrant a criminal investigation. Holy shit. In the meantime, I'm issuing a formal notice to the HOA board that their commercial property designations contradict county zoning records and must be reversed immediately. I'm also recommending that the board place Mrs. Hendricks on administrative leave pending the investigation. Will they actually do that? If they don't, they could be personally liable. That tends to motivate people. 2 days later, the other 4 board members held an emergency meeting without Patricia. I attended along with about 50 other homeowners, packing the community center beyond capacity. Board member Thomas Garrett, a nervous-looking accountant, addressed the crowd. We've received notice from the county that our property designations are in violation of zoning regulations. We've also been informed of a criminal investigation into financial irregularities. Effective immediately, all commercial property designations issued in the past 12 months are being reversed, and fees will return to standard residential rates. Homeowners who overpaid will receive refunds. The room erupted in applause. Additionally, Thomas continued, raising his voice to be heard, Patricia Hendricks has been removed from her position as HOA president and from the board entirely. I'll be serving as interim president until a special election can be held. More applause, even louder. After the meeting, Thomas pulled me aside. "I owe you an apology. We all do. We knew Patricia was aggressive, but we didn't realize how far she'd gone. When we finally got access to the financial records, it was obvious she'd been siphoning money. I'm sorry we didn't catch it sooner." What happens now? The county attorney's office will handle the criminal investigation. We're cooperating fully. We've also hired a forensic accountant to determine exactly how much money is missing, and we're getting a lawyer to see if we can recover it. Good. I went home that night feeling vindicated but exhausted. The past month had consumed my life. I'd barely worked, barely slept, barely done anything except fight with the HOA. But it wasn't over yet. Patricia, it turned out, wasn't going down without a fight. She hired a lawyer and claimed she'd done nothing wrong, that the board had approved all her actions, and that she was being scapegoated. Her lawyer sent threatening letters to Tom Martin and several others involved in the petition, claiming defamation and harassment. None of us backed down. We all had documentation, emails, recorded conversations. The evidence was overwhelming. The county attorney's investigation took 3 months. During that time, life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal. Thomas proved to be a competent interim president, focusing on basic maintenance and transparency. He published monthly financial reports online and held open forums where homeowners could ask questions. I got my refund, $3,250, covering the excess fees I'd paid over 4 months. Other homeowners received similar refunds. In July, the county attorney filed formal charges against Patricia Hendricks, 15 counts of fraud, 5 counts of theft, and 3 counts of forgery. The forgery charges related to board meeting minutes she'd falsified to make it appear the board had approved actions they'd never voted on. The local news picked up the story. HOA president accused of fraud scheme ran on Channel 12. Patricia's face was all over the news, looking indignant and outraged. She gave an interview claiming she was innocent and being persecuted by vindictive homeowners. The forensic accountant's report came out in August. Patricia had stolen over $120,000 from the HOA over 18 months through various schemes. The fake commercial designations, inflated vendor contracts where she received kickbacks, and direct transfers to her personal account that she disguised as legitimate expenses. The trial began in October. I was called as a witness, along with Tom Martin and several others. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Morrison, walked me through everything, receiving the commercial designation letter, the board meeting, my conversations with David Kramer, Patricia's retaliatory actions. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that HOA boards have wide discretion and that any financial irregularities were honest mistakes, but the evidence was damning. Email records showed Patricia discussing her schemes with her compliance officer, Susan Morris, who had apparently been her accomplice. Text messages showed her planning to target specific homeowners to maximize fee increases. Bank records showed the money flowing into her accounts. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Patricia's face went pale when the verdict was read. She'd been so confident, so certain she'd get away with it. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. In December, I sat in the courtroom again for sentencing. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, reviewed the case thoroughly before speaking. Mrs. Hendricks, you were entrusted with a position of responsibility in your community. Instead of serving your neighbors, you exploited them for personal gain. You targeted vulnerable homeowners, manipulated records, and stole substantial sums of money. Your actions caused significant financial and emotional harm to dozens of families. This court takes such violations of trust very seriously. She sentenced Patricia to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years and ordered her to pay full restitution of $123,000 plus legal fees and penalties. Susan Morris, who had pleaded guilty to lesser charges, received 2 years probation and was ordered to pay $20,000 in restitution. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked smaller somehow, diminished. The arrogant woman who had strutted around Willow Creek like a petty dictator was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood there were consequences for her actions. Outside the courthouse, several homeowners gathered. Tom Martin shook my hand firmly. "We couldn't have done this without you," he said. "You could have just paid the fees and moved on, but you stood up." "I just wanted my house back," I said. "You got a lot more than that. You got justice." The HOA held a special election in January. Thomas Garrett ran for president along with 2 other candidates. He won easily. Under his leadership, the HOA revised its bylaws to include stronger financial oversight, term limits for board members, and clearer procedures for appeals and disputes. The commercial property designation section was completely rewritten to prevent future abuse. Life in Willow Creek settled into a peaceful routine. The neighborhood felt different somehow, lighter. People trusted the HOA again, or at least didn't actively fear it. Board meetings became boring affairs focused on landscaping and pool maintenance, exactly as they should be. I finally got back to my normal life. Work picked up, and I landed a major project with a tech company in San Francisco that would keep me busy for the next year. My house remained blissfully residential, my fees stayed at $150 per month, and nobody harassed me about peeling fence paint or weeds in my gravel. David Kramer called me in February just to check in. "I wanted you to know that your case has become a training example for our department," he said. "We use it to teach planners about HOA fraud and how to spot red flags. You helped us identify a serious gap in oversight. Glad something good came out of it. More than you know. We've identified 3 other HOAs in the county with similar issues. Your willingness to fight back may have helped hundreds of other homeowners." That felt good. What had started as a personal battle over unfair fees had turned into something bigger, exposing a systemic problem and helping ensure other people wouldn't face the same abuse. On a warm evening in March, almost exactly a year after I'd received that first letter, I was grilling burgers in my backyard when Greg came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Anniversary," he said, handing me one. "Anniversary. 1 year since Patricia tried to screw you over. Seemed worth commemorating." I laughed and accepted the beer. We sat on my patio, watching the sun set over the desert mountains. "You know what the crazy thing is?" I said. "If she'd just been reasonable, if she'd asked homeowners to vote on a fee increase for her renovation projects, people probably would have said yes, the community center could use updates, but she had to be greedy and dishonest about it. That's the Patricia way, control and manipulation instead of honesty and cooperation. Well, she's paying for it now." "Literally," Greg said, and we both laughed. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from the HOA, a newsletter about upcoming community events. There was a spring barbecue planned, a pool opening party, and a volunteer day to plant new flowers around the community center. Normal, boring, wonderful HOA stuff. I thought about how close I'd come to just paying the fraudulent fees and accepting the injustice. It would have been easier in the short term, but it would have meant letting Patricia win and letting her continue to victimize others. Standing up had been exhausting and stressful, but it had been worth it. Not just for me, but for everyone in Willow Creek who deserved an HOA that served them rather than exploited them. "To justice," Greg said, raising his beer. "To justice," I echoed, clinking bottles with him. The evening air was cool and pleasant, and my house felt exactly like what it was, a home, not a battleground. The fight was over, and the good guys had won. In a world where HOAs often seemed like petty tyrannies with no accountability, it was satisfying to know that sometimes, when you stood up to corruption and fraud, the system actually worked. Patricia Hendricks would spend the next few years thinking about her choices in a prison cell. Willow Creek would move forward with honest leadership and transparent governance, and I could finally get back to my quiet life as a software developer in a residential home with reasonable fees and no drama. It wasn't a fairy tale ending with everyone living happily ever after. There would be other challenges, other HOA issues, other neighborhood disputes. But at least now everyone knew that abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated, that homeowners had rights, and that fraud had consequences. As the stars came out over Phoenix and Greg told stories about his kids' soccer games, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My property was mine, my home was secure, and justice had been served. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. The community had learned valuable lessons too. Homeowners were more engaged now, attending meetings, asking questions, reviewing financial reports. The days of rubber stamping whatever the board wanted were over. Patricia's fraud had inadvertently created a more informed and active community, one that would be harder to manipulate in the future. I thought about all the people who had helped along the way. David Kramer, the county planner who had taken my complaint seriously instead of brushing it off. Tom Martin and the other homeowners who had stood together. The prosecutor who had built a solid case, the forensic accountant who had followed the money trail, the jury who had seen through Patricia's lies, the judge who had imposed meaningful consequences. It had taken a village to bring down one corrupt HOA president, but that village had come through. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Tom Martin. "Patricia's house just went on the market. Karma." I smiled. Patricia's husband had divorced her shortly after the guilty verdict, and her house was being sold to pay legal fees and restitution. She'd lost everything, her position, her freedom, her home, her family, her reputation, all because she'd been too greedy and too arrogant to simply do the right thing. What are you smiling about? Greg asked. Just thinking about how things work out sometimes. And they do if you fight for them. That's what you did. He was right. I had fought, not just for myself, but for the principle that people in power shouldn't be allowed to abuse that power without consequences. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, just one HOA in one neighborhood in Phoenix. But it mattered to the people who lived here. The burgers finished cooking, and I called my girlfriend Diana Johnson over to join us. She was Jennifer Johnson's sister-in-law, and we'd started dating a few months after the trial ended. She'd thought I was crazy at first, taking on the HOA, but she'd come to respect my stubbornness. "Still talking about Patricia?" she asked, kissing my cheek. "Always," I said with a grin. "You need to let it go eventually." "I will, just not today." We ate burgers and told stories and laughed under the stars. The community center lights glowed in the distance, a reminder of what we were all part of. Not just individual homeowners, but a community that took care of each other and held bad actors accountable. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my couch and pulled up the original letter from Patricia that had started everything. I'd kept it, along with all the other documents, in a file folder labeled HOA Hell. I reread it now, remembering the confusion and anger I'd felt that morning in March. The letter looked ridiculous in hindsight. The legal language was pompous and overbearing, the justification for the commercial designation was absurd, and Patricia's signature at the bottom was a flourish of self-importance. This single piece of paper had set off a chain of events that had ended with criminal convictions and prison time. I filed it away again and closed the folder. I didn't need to look at it anymore. The story was over, the ending was written, and it was a good ending. My house was quiet and peaceful. Through the window, I could see my neighbors' houses, each one occupied by people just trying to live their lives without unnecessary harassment or fraudulent fees. We'd all learned that vigilance was necessary, that trust had to be earned, and that standing up to injustice was worth the effort. As I got ready for bed that night, I thought about the future. The HOA would continue to function, managing the common areas and enforcing reasonable rules. Thomas Garrett would serve out his term and probably get reelected. New homeowners would move in, and old homeowners would move out. Life would go on. But everyone would remember the year Patricia Hendricks tried to scam the neighborhood and ended up in prison. That story would be told at barbecues and pool parties for years to come. A cautionary tale about what happens when power corrupts and people fight back. I'd be part of that story, the guy who got the letter and refused to accept it, who called the county and started the investigation that brought everything down. I was okay with that role. It beat being the guy who just paid up and stayed quiet. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt grateful for a lot of things, for David Kramer's diligence, for my neighbor's solidarity, for a legal system that had actually worked, and for my own stubbornness that had refused to let injustice stand. My home was mine, properly zoned as residential, fairly assessed, and peacefully occupied. After a year of chaos and conflict, that simple truth was more valuable than ever. The next morning started like any normal day. I made coffee, checked emails, started work on my current project. The routines of ordinary life had never felt so good. No HOA drama, no court dates, no investigations, just work, home, and the simple pleasures of living in a place where I felt secure. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Richard Chen, the real estate attorney I'd consulted at the beginning of the whole mess. "Lucas, I wanted to follow up with you. I've been tracking your case and I'm impressed with how it turned out." "Thanks, it was a lot of work." "I'm sure it was. I'm actually calling because I'm putting together a presentation for a legal conference about HOA disputes and abuse of authority. Would you be willing to be interviewed about your experience?" "What would that involve?" "Just a conversation about what happened, how you responded, what worked and what didn't. It would help other attorneys understand these cases better and advise their clients more effectively." I thought about it. Reliving the whole experience didn't sound particularly fun, but if it could help other people facing similar situations, it was worth doing. "Sure, I'll do it." "Great, I'll send you some dates. And Lucas, you did something important. A lot of people would have just paid the fees or sold their house. You fought back and won. That matters." After we hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight hadn't just been about my house or my money. It had been about principles, fairness, honesty, accountability. Those principles were worth defending, even when it was hard. The months that followed were blissfully uneventful. I finished my project, started another one, took a vacation to San Diego with Diana, and generally enjoyed life without HOA drama. The neighborhood thrived under Thomas's leadership. The pool was resurfaced, new landscaping was installed around the entrance, and community events were well attended and genuinely fun. In June, I received notice that Patricia's restitution payments had begun. A check for $500 arrived, representing the first installment of what she owed me. The checks would continue monthly until the full amount was paid. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about accountability. Patricia would spend years paying back what she'd stolen, a constant reminder of her crimes. I also heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had been denied parole at her first hearing. The parole board had noted her continued lack of remorse and her attempts to blame others for her actions. She'd serve at least another year before she could apply again. Susan Morris had completed her probation and moved out of state, reportedly to stay with family in Oregon. She'd lost her job and her reputation, but at least she'd avoided prison by cooperating with the investigation. The other board members who had enabled Patricia through negligence or willful blindness had all resigned. New board members had been elected, people who were committed to transparency and good governance. The HOA was functioning better than it had in years. One afternoon in July, I was mowing my lawn when a car pulled up and a young couple got out. They walked up to me with friendly smiles. "Hi, are you Lucas Norton?" the man asked. "That's me." "I'm James. This is my wife, Kelly. We're thinking about buying a house in Willow Creek, and several people told us we should talk to you first." I turned off the mower. "What do you want to know?" "We heard there was some trouble with the HOA," Kelly said. "We want to make sure it's resolved before we buy." I gave them the full story, not sugarcoating anything but emphasizing how the community had come together to fix the problems. They listened intently, asking good questions. "So the HOA is solid now?" James asked. "As solid as any HOA can be. The important thing is that homeowners are engaged and paying attention. That's the best protection against future problems." "That's good to know. Thanks for being honest with us." They bought a house on Mesquite Drive 3 weeks later. I saw them at the pool one weekend, and they thanked me again for the advice. They seemed happy with their decision, and I was glad they'd chosen Willow Creek knowing its history rather than being blindsided later. As summer turned to fall, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been 18 months since that first letter arrived, 18 months of stress and struggle and eventual triumph. The experience had changed me in ways I was still discovering. I was more confident, more willing to stand up for myself, more aware of how systems could be manipulated and how important it was to question authority. I'd also learned about the power of community. Alone, I couldn't have defeated Patricia. But together with Tom, the Johnsons, the Williamses, and dozens of other homeowners, we'd been unstoppable. That lesson would stay with me forever. In October, I attended Richard Chen's presentation at the legal conference. He did an excellent job explaining the case, highlighting the legal issues and the strategies that had worked. During the Q&A session, several attorneys asked me questions about the homeowner perspective and what advice I'd give others in similar situations. "Document everything," I said. "Take photos, save emails, record dates and times, and don't be afraid to go outside the HOA if necessary. County officials, attorneys, the media, they can all be allies if you have a legitimate complaint." "What about people who can't afford attorneys?" someone asked. "Start with free resources, county planning departments, consumer protection offices, legal aid societies. There are options. And sometimes just the threat of legal action or media attention is enough to make an HOA back down." After the presentation, several people came up to thank me and share their own HOA horror stories. It was clear that Patricia's type of abuse wasn't unique. HOAs across the country were wrestling with similar issues. Board members who saw their position as a source of power rather than service, financial mismanagement, arbitrary rule enforcement, retaliation against critics. The more I heard, the more I realized how lucky Willow Creek had been to address its problems decisively. Many communities suffered under bad HOA leadership for years or even decades, unable to organize effective resistance. I drove home from the conference feeling energized. Maybe there was more I could do to help others facing HOA abuse. I started a blog about my experience, detailing every step of the process and offering advice for others. I called it Surviving HOA Hell and published it in November. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, I had thousands of readers and hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories or asking for advice. I spent hours responding, connecting people with resources, offering encouragement. Diana thought I was crazy, spending so much time on something that wasn't making me any money, but she supported it because she saw how passionate I was about helping people. "You found your cause," she said one evening as I typed responses to blog comments. I guess I did. Who knew that getting screwed by my HOA would turn into this? That's usually how it works. We find purpose through our struggles. She was right. Patricia's fraud had been terrible at the time, but it had led me to something meaningful. I was using my experience to help others, turning a negative into a positive. By December, my blog had become a hub for HOA reform discussions. I'd connected with advocacy groups, attorneys, journalists, and legislators interested in HOA issues. Several states were considering new laws to increase HOA transparency and accountability, partly inspired by cases like mine. I testified before the Arizona legislature in January about the need for stronger HOA oversight. I described Patricia's fraud and explained how better regulations could prevent similar abuses. The legislators listened attentively and asked thoughtful questions. 2 months later, Arizona passed the HOA Accountability Act, requiring annual independent audits for HOAs over a certain size, establishing a state ombudsman for HOA disputes, and creating stronger penalties for financial fraud by HOA board members. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The governor invited me to the signing ceremony. Standing in the Capitol building, watching the governor sign the bill into law, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond my personal victory over Patricia. "This is because of you," Tom Martin said. He'd come to the ceremony too, representing Willow Creek. "It's because of all of us," I replied. "We stood up, we fought back, and we didn't quit. That's what made the difference." Life continued to improve in Willow Creek. Property values rose as the neighborhood's reputation recovered. The community center renovations that Patricia had wanted were finally happening, but this time they were funded through a properly approved fee increase that homeowners had voted for. The process was transparent, the contracts were competitive, and nobody was skimming money off the top. Diana and I got engaged in March, standing on the same patio where Greg and I had toasted justice a year earlier. We planned a small wedding for the fall, probably at the community center. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "From fighting the HOA to getting married at the community center," Diana laughed, "that's quite a journey." Life's funny that way. My blog continued to grow, and I'd started getting speaking invitations from community groups and homeowner associations across the country. I talked about governance best practices, financial transparency, how to spot warning signs of abuse, and how to organize effective resistance when necessary. Some HOA boards bristled at my message, seeing me as anti-HOA, but I wasn't. I believed HOAs could serve a valuable purpose when run honestly and competently. The problem was that too many weren't, and homeowners needed to know they had options and rights. In April, I received a letter from Patricia. It had been forwarded through her attorney, and I almost threw it away unread. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and defensive. Patricia claimed she still maintained her innocence, that she'd been railroaded by a vindictive county attorney and a biased jury. She blamed me personally for destroying her life and accused me of conducting a witch hunt. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she had actually done, no recognition of the harm she'd caused, just self-pity and resentment. And I showed the letter to Diana, who read it and shook her head. She still doesn't get it. No, she doesn't, and she probably never will. I threw the letter away. Patricia was no longer my problem. She was paying her debt to society, literally and figuratively, and that was enough. I didn't need her apology or her understanding. I just needed her to stop hurting people, and she'd been effectively prevented from doing that. The wedding came together beautifully. We got married in September at the Willow Creek Community Center, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors who had become friends through our shared struggle against Patricia. Tom Martin gave a toast about perseverance and community. Greg made jokes about HOA bylaws and marriage contracts. Diana's sister Jennifer caught the bouquet. It was a perfect day, made more meaningful by everything we'd been through to get there. On our honeymoon in Hawaii, Diana and I talked about the future. Kids eventually, maybe a bigger house, continuing my advocacy work, building a life together, all the normal dreams and plans that people make, unthreatened by corrupt HOA presidents or fraudulent fee schemes. When we returned home, Willow Creek felt more like home than ever. My house, the one Patricia had tried to falsely designate as commercial, was now the place where my wife and I would build our life together. The spare bedroom where I worked would someday be a nursery. The backyard would host birthday parties and barbecues. Patricia had tried to take all of that away with her greed and dishonesty, but she'd failed. The good guys had won, justice had been served, and life had moved on to better things. I still maintain the blog, still give occasional talks, still help people navigate HOA disputes. But it's no longer the center of my life. It's just something I do because I can, because I have experience and knowledge that might help others. Patricia will be released from prison eventually. She'll finish paying her restitution. She'll try to rebuild her life somewhere else. I don't wish her harm, but I don't wish her well either. I simply wish to never think about her again, to let her fade into the past where she belongs. Willow Creek thrives under competent leadership. Thomas Garrett was re-elected twice before finally stepping down, replaced by a retired accountant named Margaret who runs the HOA with quiet efficiency. Fees remain reasonable, services are good, and homeowners trust their board. That trust, once broken by Patricia's fraud, has been painstakingly rebuilt through transparency, accountability, and consistent good governance. It's a lesson that HOAs everywhere should learn. Trust is earned slowly and lost quickly, and the consequences of losing it can be severe. As I sit here now, more than 3 years after receiving that first fraudulent letter, I can honestly say I'm grateful for the experience. Not because it was fun, it wasn't. Not because it was easy, it definitely wasn't. But because it taught me important lessons about standing up for what's right, about the power of community, and about how justice sometimes really does prevail when people refuse to give up. My house is residential, my fees are fair, my community is strong, and Patricia Hendricks is exactly where she belongs, facing the consequences of her actions while the rest of us move forward with our lives. That's not just a happy ending, that's justice.